right, so welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at some basic drawing techniques that can be used with a variety of different media. We're going to be looking at drawing pens and markers such as the Micron series in order to be able to help develop a sense of sort of texture and help embellish your sense of overall style. This is also really good for looking at new and innovative ways of adding different values to your work as opposed to just completely flat areas of color. Right? So first of all, we know that value is the idea of light areas and dark areas. And when we're drawing and using drawing techniques in order to create these values, there's two key principles that we need to remember. Number one is proximity, and that is how close the lines that we are drawing are to each other. Right? And the second is thinking about the media that we are using. So in this case, we're using a black pen on a white surface. So the closer I make my marks with the black the black pen to each other, right, the darker the value is going to be, right? And what we're going to be taking a look at in this particular video are some of the different strategies of how to go about making those marks on your piece of paper. So the first technique that we're going to be taking a look at goes back to the different types of line that we had talked about earlier in the year, right? And we're going to be thinking about directional line. So in this box, right, I want to create different values, right, and different textures. So by using my pen and keeping these lines fairly close together, and I can go back and I can overlap these lines a little bit in order to help create a tonal effect, right? So by placing my lines really close together, I'm going to get a darker value. By placing my lines slightly farther apart, I'm going to get a medium value. And when I place them even farther apart, right, I'm going to get an even lighter value, right? And if I place them extremely, extremely close together, and I can go back and overlap them, I can get an even darker value. Okay? So the first approach that we can use is what we call directional line. Okay. We can combine this, instead of just using one direction, we can go through a process called hatching. And this is where we're going to end up using the same idea of using directional lines, but now we're going to start overlapping these in a kind of predictable way. Okay? So I'm kind of rotating the marks at about a 45-degree angle to each other, and I'm overlapping in order to create my value. Right. The idea with hatching is that there's a sense of organization, control, a little bit of predictability with how these lines are being applied. Right? I'm always kind of rotating on a consistent 45-degree change. Right? So I start doing vertical, and then I rotate 45 degrees, and then I do my horizontal lines, and then I come back and I can go back in the other direction. Right? So this is what we call our hatching. We also have a similar technique that is called cross-hatching. And the main difference here, right, is that where this particular form of hatching has some predictability about it, this is about applying lines in a more kind of random or haphazard way, and we're just looking at how are we going to go about creating that value by overlapping the lines, and we're not concerned with making sure that each line is perfectly parallel to each other. So when I'm doing this, I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm starting with a fairly light application and slowly going back over in order to create some of those darker zones. Okay? So we have, and these three, you can see that there's kind of a progression in terms of how these three are working. The second last one that we're going to use or talk about is pointillism. Okay? Otherwise known as stippling. Okay? And this one I'm going to tell you, if you're using a nice marker like a Micron, you're going to want to be really, really careful with this. Okay? Because the idea here is that you're just slowly lifting your pen and gently applying a series of dots in order to be able to create some textures here, right? And going back and forth. But it's the same principle that applies. The closer that these dots are to each other, the darker your value is going to be, right? If I have a bunch of dots that are far apart, that's a light value. If I have a whole bunch that are concentrated really close to each other, I'm going to get a darker value. Okay, the last technique that we're going to take a look at is the idea of sort of I'm going to call it a controlled or purposeful scribble, right? So where these are all using very sort of sharp linear lines, a scribble is going to be using a more organic or curvy line in order to create that sense of value, right? And it's, again, the same principle. The closer that the marks are to each other, then the darker the value will be perceived, okay? And this is what we call our scribble. Okay. So these are 5 different techniques that you can go about adding value. Right? You can combine with our previous lesson that we did with our value scales in order to help create a sense of texture and sense of finish in your work. All right. Good luck. Play around, experiment. And again, as always, if you have any questions, please make sure that you're asking. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.